All right, well, in the spirit of starting on time, I'll go ahead and start. My name is Piero. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Osmo. And today I'll talk a little bit about Bitcoin adoption in Guatemala. And is Guatemala the next to adopt Bitcoin? So I saw somebody yesterday, a couple people with shirts that said open source everything. And in the spirit of open sourcing everything, I'm here to open source some information and some insights that apply specifically to Guatemala, but also, I believe, apply to other countries that are in or other developing nations, rather. So before we talk about Guatemala, I want to make sure we all know where Guatemala is. Right now, you are right here in El Salvador, and Guatemala is right here. So right, the next door neighbor, the biggest commerce partner of El Salvador is Guatemala, and the biggest commerce partner for Guatemala is El Salvador. So a little bit about our current reality. And again, this reality applies not just to Guatemala, but to a lot of developing nations. 70% of our economy is an informal economy. What does this mean? This means that people like this old man sell whatever he's selling. In this case, it's candy, and he only accepts cash. And an informal economy means it's a 100% cash-based economy. What it also means is that 30% of people, the people that have access to financial services, pay the taxes for the rest of the country, because it's really hard to get somebody to pay taxes if you have no idea how much they're making, how much they're selling, et cetera, because there's no traceability, because it's 100% cash-based. This guy here is a coffee farmer. He gets paid in cash, even though he has a steady job, and every year during the coffee harvesting season, he has a job and gets paid. He gets paid in cash. So again, absolutely no traceability. And the reason I'm talking about traceability is not because I want everyone to pay taxes, although that's really nice because it builds infrastructure in our country, but rather because when there's no traceability and everything is cash-based, you have a very small percentage of the population, subsidizing all of this infrastructure for the rest of the country. So it's nicer when, you distribute that amongst many people. And 70% of our population is unbanked. And I'll explain a little bit about what that means and why they are unbanked, because it's really fascinating. And not only are they unbanked, but over 70% of the population has no access to electricity. So this is a picture of a Guatemalan woman in Lake Atitlan doing her clothes, washing her clothes in the lake. Again, with no electricity, you can't have a machine that washes your clothing, so you need to do it by hand, either in the river or the lake. So unbanked, what do I mean by unbanked, and why are people unbanked? You'd think, well, all these people could just go make a line at the bank and open a bank account, right? It should be that easy. But the reality is that it really is not that easy. So when you want to open a bank account, you need to show a couple documents. The first is proof of employment. If you're somebody that sells in the streets, or if you're a farmer that gets paid in cash, you can't get proof of employment. There is no document that your boss, who sells the coffee in exchange for cash, he can't even give you a document that the bank will receive and accept to show that you have an employment. So this applies to everyone, vendors on the streets, farmers, and 70% of the population. Not only that, you don't have proof of employment, but you don't have proof of address. Without electricity in your house, you don't get an electric bill, so you can't show your proof of address to the bank. 90% of people use prepaid phones, so again, you don't receive a bill at the end of the month for your phone, so you can't even use your phone bill as a proof of address. So no proof of employment, no proof of address, the bank isn't going to open an account for you. And lastly, there's a very high percentage of illiteracy rates in our countries and in developing nations overall. What does this mean? People can't read and write properly. So when you go to a bank and they give you 20 pages to read and fill out and sign. If you can't read and write properly, well, good luck filling up those 20 pages to open a bank account, right? So essentially, without proof of address, without proof of employment, and if you can't read and write properly, can't open a bank account. So it's not that banks don't want to open people bank accounts, it's that they literally cannot open a bank account. And out of the 30% of people that do have bank accounts, they're all underbanked. And what do I mean by underbanked? Well, there's shitty online banking. This you see right here is literally a screenshot of my online bank. It looks like a website that was developed in 1992. So you can imagine what a pain in the ass it is to send money even between bank accounts. There's no Venmo, there's no Cash App, there's no Zelle. Heck, there's no even PayPal. PayPal, the first fintech, does not exist in Central America. It exists in Mexico, but it doesn't really work. But from Guatemala down to Panama, you can't even use PayPal. You can create an account at PayPal, but you can't cash. There's no on-ramp or off-ramp to PayPal. So you can only use your PayPal balance to pay somebody else that has a PayPal account. So essentially, it doesn't exist. And if you want to invest your money because you are a person that is banked, but you are underbanked, there's no Robinhood. And if you want to invest in Bitcoin, there's no Coinbase and no Binance. So essentially, you're shit out of luck. All you can do if you have a bank account is hold your money in the bank. That's pretty much it. But, as we like to say, Bitcoin fixes this. And how? How does it fix this? I believe that you can fix this using Bitcoin as a Trojan horse. Here I put a Trojan unicorn, but the idea is the same. And how specifically? Through education. We need so much education. But specifically, in our opinion, it's not education on how Bitcoin works, but rather, how do you use Bitcoin? Nobody taught me how TCP/IP works, how HTTPS works, how Bluetooth works, how Wi-Fi works. I don't even know how the engine in my car works. And honestly, I don't need to, I don't care to. I know that if I push a lever on the right side, I'll move forward in my car, and if I push the other one, I'll stop, right? I know how to use my car, but I don't know how my car works. And essentially, we need to use this same way of thinking to accelerate Bitcoin adoption in Guatemala and everyone else. So don't teach people how Bitcoin works, but rather, how do you use Bitcoin to solve a real life problem? And the Trojan horse I was talking about, I think specifically for developing nations, we need to target payments and remittances. And make it a no-brainer. Again, don't teach people how Bitcoin works, but just teach them how to use it. Use it to send money, use it to send remittances and receive remittances, and use it to make payments. Or as we like to say in Spanish, we make Bitcoin estúpidamente fácil. So what do I mean by estúpidamente fácil? What is this no-brainer I'm talking about? The first, automatic conversion to fiat. And a lot of people might dislike this, but the reality is that people that live with under $1 a day, they live day to day. They can't wait, they can't be Bitcoin cowboys riding the ups and downs and the volatility. They need it as a payment rail to convert it automatically to fiat, take it out in cash, and be able to pay in cash. And these are all baby steps to a future that we all would like to live in. And hopefully later, everyone moves on to a Bitcoin standard. But we can't try and force people to live off of a Bitcoin standard, specifically the marginalized communities in developing nations. Another key aspect is create cash-out locations. Partner with existing remittance companies and convenience stores that have high volumes of cash so that people can go and convert their Bitcoin to cash. That is key. Why? Let's say if you partner with a remittance company, people have been using the same remittance company for the past 40 years. So they trust this institution. They know that every time they go, they can receive their money. And before, they might have received their money through Western Union. Now they're receiving it through Bitcoin, but they need the cash, right? So you need to create cash-in, physical cash-in and cash-out locations. And another one is speak to people in a language they understand. Something I see a lot is that foreigners think, oh, well, Latin America, everyone speaks Spanish, right? But I could say the same about English, except that people in Australia speak English, and people in Scotland speak English, and it's a totally different English. And the same is true in Spanish. And it's not even the geographical distance. In El Salvador, you speak totally different than you speak in Mexico, or in Guatemala, or in Costa Rica. Totally different. So if a foreign company wants to come and assume that they can just onboard people onto Bitcoin and they speak to everyone the same, you really need to speak to people in the way that they understand. Another thing that is key is conscious design. And by conscious design, one of the things I mean is fuck dark mode. I see so many apps that are dark mode first. And clearly these people that are building these apps have never spoken to a farmer and have gone out to rural parts of Guatemala or El Salvador or out in the mountains. And if you have a dark screen, if in your $1,300 iPhone, great, you can see it pretty well. But in a $150 smartphone, a dark screen under the sun becomes a black mirror. You can't see shit. So you need, scrap the dark mode. Again, know your audience, right? Who are you targeting? Another big thing is make big buttons. The biggest source of deforestation in our countries here in Central America is for wood for the cooking stove. So people cook with open fires in their homes, which means that this creates a lot of smoke in the home. And when people are living in the same home that's full of smoke, they develop eye problems, like cataracts. These people can't afford reading glasses, so now you have somebody that is trying to look at a dark screen under the sun that has cataracts. They can't see shit. You need big buttons and you need conscious design. It is key for adoption. And lastly, what I believe is that you need, again, when you want to solve people's problems, you need to make it super, super easy. And in our opinion, a custodial solution or different solutions that enable communities to custody their Bitcoin as a community are key. And why? Think about it. Seed phrases are in English. Try to get somebody that is illiterate and barely speaks Spanish and can barely read and write in Spanish, and suddenly you're asking them to memorize 12 words that for them are not words, so it's a bunch of letters in a specific order in a language they don't understand. Like, come on, we really can't expect to onboard people onto Bitcoin and for everyone to be sovereign and for everyone to custody their own Bitcoin. It's baby steps. So speak to people in a language they understand. And currently, seed phrases, for the most part, are in English. So it doesn't really work. You know, we can't expect for them to be self-custodial. Something we've done in the last 3.5 months since we launched is that we've onboarded right now 134 businesses that are accepting Bitcoin today in Guatemala. And we have a wait list of 1,800 businesses that have agreed to accept Bitcoin. But our team is very small. We can't onboard them all at the same time. So in the next 6 months, 1,800 businesses in Guatemala will be accepting Bitcoin. How do we do this? We do this by making it a no-brainer. Again, estúpidamente fácil. So we offer businesses the ability to accept Bitcoin payments, but they receive fiat in the end of the day. There's no volatility for them, and they're essentially just using Bitcoin as payment rails. And we're significantly cheaper than accepting credit card payments. The average credit card transaction fee in Central America is 5.5%, plus 30 cents of a dollar, a US dollar per transaction. We charge significantly lower than that. So when you go to a business and you say, hey, listen, I'm a lot cheaper than a credit card, you'll receive fiat in your bank account within 24 hours, and the way I like to explain it to them is, all of these tourists that are coming to visit Guatemala, let's say a German guy from Germany, he has a German bank account, and he pays in Guatemala, he is paying in euros. Whether he likes it or not, the only thing he has in his bank account is euros. But he's paying at a local business in Guatemala, and the local business, without knowing, is accepting euros, but receiving quetzales, which is our local currency at the end of the day. So the same thing is what we sell to the business and how we've gotten so many businesses to agree to accept Bitcoin. They accept Bitcoin, there's no volatility, but at the end of the day, they receive quetzales the same way they're accepting euros, but in the end of the day, they receive quetzales. And why Guatemala? Why do I think that Guatemala will be the next one to adopt Bitcoin? It's a fertile ground. I hope that by now you got a better understanding of the reality of our countries and how much the ecosystem is ripe for disruption. So Guatemala specifically receives $12 billion a year in remittances. $12 billion a year in remittances. This represents 25% of the GDP. There's nothing that even comes close in terms of, if you look at the GDP in a pie chart, remittances is by far the biggest import Guatemala receives. And that's why the Trojan horse should be focusing on payments and remittances. A blessing that we have in this day and age is high smartphone penetration. And in fact, really high smartphone penetration. There's about 21 million phone lines, mobile phone lines in Guatemala, and only 18 million people. That's 119% penetration of smartphones. So over 90% of people, even if they don't have a smartphone themselves, their brother has a smartphone or their mother has a smartphone. So in each household, there is a smartphone. And they all use WhatsApp, they all use Facebook, they all use Instagram. There's more phones than toilets. People prefer to invest $150 to buy a smartphone than to invest the same $150 to stop using a latrine and instead use a toilet. So today, in Central America, there are more smartphones than toilets, and this is mind-blowing. And lastly, Guatemala, out of all places, seems to be spearheading in terms of communities and Guatemalan Bitcoin-only companies. So Osmo, of course, is a Guatemalan Bitcoin-only company. IBEX, the guys at IBEX back there, are also Guatemalan, also Bitcoin-only. And it's not just companies that are leading the way in Guatemala, it's also community-led initiatives like Bitcoin Lake, we have some members of Bitcoin Lake here as well. So unlike El Salvador, where it was a top-bottom approach, where the government said, let's adopt Bitcoin, I definitely do not see this happening in Guatemala. I see adoption as coming from communities and companies and building it from the bottom up. Thanks. We have a couple minutes left, so I'd like to open the floor for questions or comments.
So, three questions real quick. One, where are your businesses based? Like the 1,500 you're trying to on board. Second, how do you do with the different indigenous peoples in Guatemala which speak different languages? And three, which kind of services and products are you trying to onboard?
Cool. So the first one, the 1,800 businesses are really spread out all over the country. What we've done is target companies that have a lot of brick and mortar locations. So for example, the 7-Eleven of Guatemala, they have 500 locations. So out of the 1,800 that you saw, 500 was one merchant that has 500 locations in different parts of the country. The biggest right now, if you look at the map, is in Guatemala City, but also Antigua, Guatemala, and around Lake Atitlan are like the hubs for now. Second question, how do we target, just fun fact, in Guatemala, there's 23 different languages spoken. They're not dialects, they're fully different languages. When I mean fully different, is as different from Chinese as to English. Totally different languages. 23 plus Spanish, 24 languages are spoken in the country. And 23 are from these indigenous communities. So they all, or for the most part, they do speak Spanish, but what we do is that we get community leaders that they know and trust to go into the communities and explain in their language how to use the app. And lastly, your question is what type of products we're offering. We're offering people to send and receive money instantly, virtually for free, over Lightning and also on-chain. And we're offering automatic conversion to fiat if they so choose to. And lastly, you can buy and sell Bitcoin on the app as well. So for now, that's what we're focusing on. We know that there's a huge potential to offer bill payments, credit, et cetera, but baby steps, that's what we're focusing on right now.
You mentioned that you don't see the government doing anything top-down like they did in El Salvador, but it's more of a bottoms-up approach. What is the stance of the government? Are they neutral? Are they helpful? Are they hostile? Taxes and all that kind of stuff.
Honestly, they're not super hostile. There is no regulation in Guatemala for Bitcoin. So before we even launched Osmo, for the first 6 months, we went and we spoke to every banker and every board of the banks, and then we went and we spoke to the government and spoke to the regulating entity of banks in Guatemala and said, listen, this is what we're going to do. We're a payment company and a remittance company, but instead, Western Union uses its own rails. MoneyGram now uses Stellar as rails. We're going to use Bitcoin as rails. So we got a money transmitting license, and so by doing that and by following KYC standards, the same limits and standards that apply for remittance companies, they were like, well, this makes sense. You're pretty much doing the same, just that you're using different rails. What we can tell you is that what you're doing is not illegal. And we're like, all right, can we get that in writing? And they said, no, but we can tell you that what you're doing is not illegal. So for now, that has been our approach, and so far we have relationships with every bank. The government knows what we're doing. And again, we're a remittance company that uses different rails. Worth mentioning, when you open Osmo, all you need is your name, your last name, and an email address, and you open your account. And you can, within a minute, you can start sending and receiving Bitcoin. So no KYC needed to send and receive Bitcoin. The moment you want to convert it to fiat, or the moment you want to convert fiat to Bitcoin, then you need to take a picture of your ID, a selfie, and go through the KYC process. But if you just want to use Osmo as a wallet, then you don't need any KYC.
Is ID prevalent across?
Yeah, so great question. About 98% of people have a government-issued ID in Guatemala. So, yeah, you really can't do anything without a government ID. And pretty much when you turn 16, you go and you get your government ID. So. So the question for the non-Spanish speakers is, do I think of the Bitcoin diploma that Mi Primer Bitcoin is implementing here in the schools, if it can be implemented in Guatemala? The answer is yes. I think that we need it, and we're actively working with Mi Primer Bitcoin and IBEX to bring it to Guatemala.
Do you want to elaborate? Because one of the things that you said was, which I think we agree with, is education is key. What is your view of how that will happen within Guatemala?
So when you're at war, you can't just have one person fighting, right? Like when you're playing chess, all of the pieces are moving in different directions. And because in Guatemala there's a lot of communities and a lot of companies doing this, I think it has to be a multi-layered approach. So bringing things like Mi Primer Bitcoin to schools is one layer. Getting indigenous leaders in indigenous communities to know how to use the app is another layer. And then when you attack the enemy from different fronts, it's a lot easier for adoption to happen.
We have the radio too, by the way.
But yeah, true.
There's a program that's already started like maybe 2 months ago. Friends of Bitcoin Lake. So it's a national radio at 7 p.m. It's like the best of times, and it's national. And they teach about Bitcoin. It's 1 hour, 1 segment every Monday, and it's recorded. Then you have the podcast. I mean, it's all there. If ever you want to watch it, go to the podcast and listen.
Agreed. So again, it's multi-layered approach from different fronts, from radio to TV, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, Piero, so it's FM 100, Monday nights at 7 p.m. And we will be implementing Mi Primera in Nancy School this January. So we'll be the first school, I guess, in Guatemala.
Cool. Congrats. So see, so it's really refreshing and reassuring to see that we're not the only crazy ones trying to do this, but that there's other crazy people that believe in what we believe in, and that we're all, fighting on the same front. So, well, thanks so much, guys.